on the specific policy would be through the legislative process. So there might be people here today that are opposed to conversion therapy that also believe it should go through the legislative process and would object to the code before us today. So it is obviously a complicated issue, but I do want to point out that today we're here to discuss the limit of authority on the legislature intended to grant, and if they went above and beyond that authority. We're not a mini policy making legislature. This is a joint committee solely focused on reviewing the rules promulgated by agencies and examining boards, ensuring they follow the rules process clearly laid out in chapter 227. With that, it looks like we had a question. I'd be happy to take questions before we begin testimonies.
Yeah, I'm just kind of taken aback because, I mean, just because you say you're not doing what we're about to do doesn't mean you're not doing it, which is legalizing conversion therapy by repealing a rule that was put forward by a professional board and done basically because the legislature failed to give intent. And I think that last time we were here, there was an attempt to say legislative intent was dictated because the legislature didn't move forward on a bill and then put forward a bill and then didn't act on that. So therefore, we have two heads of a snake pulling in opposite directions on what legislative intent is, because there was a bill that would have banned it and there's a bill that would not have banned it. Both of those failed, and so now we're using this committee to intervene on a professional board that has banned it. Said legislature hasn't acted, legislature hasn't said you can do this, legislature hasn't said you can't do this. And instead, they as a board, a professional board, put forward a list of many different things of what constitutes professional conduct. And now this body is reaching in and saying, professionals, listen, we're going to pull out this one piece where you have banned the practice of torturing kids, and we're going to say, yeah, we're going to ban that so that people who are still listed as professional counselors, family therapists, that you can continue to do conversion therapy. That may not feel like legislating to you, but it is a very roundabout way of allowing and legalizing acceptable torture, through what they call conversion therapy, conversion torture, whatever you want to call it, but trying to force kids through something that is recognized by the psychological board nationally as unethical. So I'm unless there's unless you're going to try and convince me the last 2 years didn't happen and that we did have legislative hearings on this, and I'm not going to wake up here and say, well, oh gosh, because you didn't do this 2 years ago, we're suddenly going to believe you that now there's a piece of legislation that's going to move forward and people will be able to engage in the legislative process. We lived through the last 2 years. We were all here. I was here. Senator Royce was here. You were here, Mr. Chairman. Senator Nass was here. A few other members. We were new. 3 members were not. But the idea then, the red cape that was held up then was, well, we're going to have legislation. We can talk about it in the legislative process. And then once that evaporated, they went through the process, and now we're trying to say, no, chase the red cape again. We're not going to do legislation, so please don't talk about this. This is just rules. Don't pay attention to what's going on over here. When the end result of what, if this moves forward as an action, would be to legalize professionals, people under the guise of professionalism, torturing kids through trying to convert them.
Thank you for your comments, Senator. And again, I'm not going to get into the merits of conversion therapy, which is obviously a very controversial subject. The scope of what we're here today to do is to determine if, the agents or the examining board overstepped their legislative authority. And I just want to point out one thing in terms of how you're, characterizing this rule, which, in terms of conversion therapy, this is not just applied to minors, this is all ages. Other states have looked at doing this specifically for minors, but within this code, there's nothing in there about specifically to minors. This has to do just with the practice as a whole. So it could be, theoretically somebody that is an adult that voluntarily chooses to go through this type of therapy. So it's not specific to children within this code. I just want to point that out as you characterize it. And also just state again that we're not here to debate the merits of that practice, simply to discuss the role of an examining board to administer rule, to come up with code of ethics versus overstepping and doing public policy that you have indicated has been proposed, and people agree that this is public policy that should be handled in legislation. As you've indicated, we've seen several bills on this topic. So that's simply where we're coming from on that. Any other comments before we get into discussion? I do not see anybody here registered for DSPS or the examining board. Is there anybody that is here specifically as part of the creation of this code? Typically we like to start there, but as we do not have anybody from the agency or the examining board here to testify on behalf of their code today, we will go right into the people that have indicated they'd like to speak on this. First up, we'll start with Mark Herstand with National Association of Social Workers speaking against. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Herstand.
Chairperson Nayland, Chairperson Nass, and members of the Joint Committee on Review of Administrative Rules. Child abuse, torture, major mental health and suicidal risk, unprofessional conduct, fake therapy. These are words you could use to describe conversion or reparative therapy. Here are words you could not use to describe conversion or reparative therapy: social work, professional counseling, marriage and family therapy. Now, as you'll hear from others, and I'm not going to go into great depth, this is an extremely harmful practice that causes major mental health and suicidal ideology among young people and people who receive this therapy. There's documented evidence of people committing suicide who have undergone conversion therapy. It's been banned in 20 states and over 14 Wisconsin communities. Every mental health and medical organization have expressed opposition. They include American Academy of Child Adolescent Psychiatry, American Academy of Pediatrics, American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, American College of Physicians, American Counseling Association, American Medical Association, American Psychiatric Association, American Psychoanalytical Association, American Psychological Association, American School Counselor Association, National Association of Social Workers, who I of course represent, Pan American Health Organization, Regional Office of the World Health Organization, the World Psychiatric Association, and in the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Health Human Services. And despite universal opposition among health and mental health professions, and the lack of any research showing its benefits, and the evidence that shows it's very harmful to LGBTQ youth, unfortunately it's still prevalent in the United States. According to estimates by the Williams Institute of UCLA School of Law, 698,000 LGBTQ adults have received conversion therapy, including about 365,000 youth. In addition, the Williams Institute estimates 16,000 youth will receive conversion therapy from a licensed healthcare professional before they reach the age of 18. They also estimate that 10,000 LGBTQ youth ages 13 to 17 who live in states that have banned conversion therapy would have received this therapy if their state hadn't banned it. Now, I'd like to address two arguments used against the rule, including the one you just mentioned. So the main argument, I've heard two of them. The first argument I've heard is that somehow the examining board does not have the authority to make this rule. However, in a Wisconsin Legislative Council memo dated June 19th, 2020, which if anybody doesn't have it, I'd be happy to provide a copy, the specific statutory authority for professional boards to promulgate rules is delineated. What are these provisions? They are found in Wisconsin section 15.8 and B statutes, which states, each examining board shall promulgate rules for its own guidance and for the guidance of the trade or profession to which it pertains, and define and enforce professional conduct, i.e. what we're doing here, and unethical practices, what we're talking about here, not consistent with the law related to a particular trade or profession. This is not consistent with social work. And in section 457.03, the law that governs the profession of social work, it states, the marriage professional counseling and social work examining board shall do all of the following. Upon the advice of the social work section, marriage and family therapy section, and professional counseling section, promulgate rules establishing a code of ethics to govern the professional conduct. So this is in the law. It states that the examining board has the authority to do that. Okay? Clearly they are able to do that. The other argument I've heard from one office is that this is somehow, quote, arbitrary and capricious, this action. Well, you may or may not be aware, but the Wisconsin Supreme Court has used the following definition of arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary or capricious action on the part of an administrative agency occurs when it can be said that such action is unreasonable or doesn't have a rational basis. Unreasonable or doesn't have a rational basis. Arbitrary action is a result of unconsidered, willful, or irrational choice of conduct and not the result of a winnowing and sifting process. Well, first of all, given the documented harm that conversion therapy causes LGBTQ youth and its condemnation from every major health and medical organization, which I've mentioned, no one can say that this proposal is irrational. No one can also say that it's unconsidered, which is necessary if you're going to define something as arbitrary and capricious. The definition of conversion therapy in this rule was finalized after a thorough review of the definition from other states and discussion by examining board members and department staff. It is one of the best definitions of conversion therapy I've seen, and better than the one we actually submitted a definition to the department when we were proposing this change, and they rejected it. I came up with this one. It's actually better than the one we had. The actual process has been going on since 2018. Hardly a irrational and unconsidered process. The scope of practice for this rule, required for the beginning of the rule, was approved in the previous administration. As mentioned, 20 states and 14 Wisconsin communities have already banned conversion therapy. This rule is anything but arbitrary and capricious. Now, I don't know specifically if there are therapists in Wisconsin who practice conversion or reparative therapy with LGBTQ children. However, if I was a parent and wanted my son or daughter to go into conversion therapy, I know where I would go to try to find someone. There are at least 21 mental health professionals were listed on the Focus for the Family, this is a national website, referral list as, quote, Christian counselors operating with a, quote, biblical perspective who will provide services to Wisconsin clients. 4 of these 21 clients found on the Focus for the Family's Christian counselors referral list for Wisconsin list a specialty in homosexual issues. You can make your own conclusions. On their website, Focus on the Family states the following about homosexuality in their document entitled Homosexuality Theology in the Church. Sexual expression is designed for the marital relationship. Homosexual lesson behavior among the sexual sins that are outside God's intent and desire for us. They also have an 8-part series